I found out I no longer had a key to my parents' house on a Tuesday afternoon in early March. The kind of day that looks harmless until it isn't. I was 31, standing on the front porch of the home I grew up in, holding a cardboard box of medical files under one arm and a bouquet of grocery store tulips in the other. I'd driven 4 hours after a night shift because my mother said she might need help organizing things. She didn't sound upset, just distracted. That should have warned me. The key slid into the lock easily. It just didn't turn. I tried again. Same result. Solid resistance. Final. For a second, I assumed the lock was old or jammed. I jiggled it gently, then harder. Nothing. Through the glass, I could see movement. My sister's silhouette crossed the hallway, phone pressed to her ear, laughing softly. She didn't look toward the door. I knocked. Once. Twice. Finally, the door opened, just enough for my sister to peer out. Claire, 34, perfect posture, even in sweatpants. She blinked like she was surprised to see me. "Oh," she said. "You're early." I glanced at my phone. "You told me noon." She hesitated, then stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind her. The lock clicked. "They changed the locks last week," she said casually. "Didn't Mom tell you?" "No," I said. Claire shifted her weight. "It was just easier, with everything." "What everything?" She exhaled through her nose. "You've been gone a lot." I stared at her. "I work nights, at a hospital. You know that." "I know," she said quickly. "But Mom gets anxious. She wants consistency." The word consistency landed wrong. Like a corporate policy applied to a family. "Can I come in?" I asked. Claire glanced toward the door, then back at me. "They're meeting with the financial planner." My stomach tightened. "About what?" She smiled, thin and polite. "Just planning." That was the first moment something in me went quiet. Not angry, not hurt, alert. I handed her the flowers. "Give these to Mom." She took them, surprised. "You're not staying?" "No," I said. "I'll come back when I'm invited." Her smile faltered. "Don't be dramatic." I nodded. "I won't." I walked back to my car with the box still under my arm. I didn't look back. At the time, I didn't know that moment would divide my life into before and after. I only knew that something had shifted, and that whatever came next wouldn't ask for my opinion. My name is Hannah Moore. I'm a clinical data analyst at a private research hospital outside Minneapolis. I design trial protocols, track outcomes, and flag inconsistencies before they become lawsuits. I'm very good at noticing patterns other people miss, which is why, even then, I noticed this wasn't about locks. It was about access. My parents had always liked Claire better. They didn't hide it. She was organized, predictable, married to an architect, 2 kids, a life that made sense to them. I was the other one. The daughter who moved cities, worked nights, never asked for help, and didn't provide the comfort of being easily explained to neighbors. They called that independence. They also used it to justify decisions made without me. The week after the lock incident, my mother texted, "Hope you're not upset. This is just a transition." I stared at the message for a long time before replying, "I'm not upset. I just need clarity." She didn't respond. Instead, I got an email from my father 2 days later. "We're updating some paperwork. Nothing you need to worry about. We'll explain later." That was when I requested copies of the documents. Not emotionally, logistically. I emailed their attorney, whose name I recognize from past estate updates, and asked for confirmation of any changes involving shared assets. The reply came back polite and evasive. "We'll coordinate through your parents." That was answer enough. At work, I pulled public records during a lunch break. Deed transfers, trust filings, recent notarizations. It took me 20 minutes to find the first anomaly. My grandmother's house, the one explicitly named in her will as divided equally between grandchildren, had been moved into a family LLC the previous month. Managers listed, my father and Claire, no mention of me. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. This wasn't an oversight. This was execution. That night, I didn't call my parents. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't ask Claire what she knew. I opened a new folder on my laptop and labeled it simply, More. I began saving documents, emails, screenshots, filings, dates. Not because I planned revenge, because I needed leverage. By the end of the week, I knew 3 things for certain. 1. My family had decided my absence equaled consent. 2. Claire wasn't just benefiting, she was involved. And 3. Whatever affection they claimed to have for me had always been conditional on how easy I was to manage. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was administrative, and that made it dangerous. On Friday evening, as I packed for another overnight shift, my phone buzzed. A text from Claire. "You didn't have to make things awkward. Mom's been crying," I typed back slowly. I didn't change the locks. I didn't move the assets. I didn't exclude myself. She didn't respond. At 2:14 a.m., while monitoring trial data in a quiet office, I made a decision. I would not argue my way back into this family. I would not beg to be included. I would treat this exactly like what it was, a system acting against my interests, and I would respond accordingly. By the time the sun came up, I had already scheduled a consultation with an estate litigation attorney. I didn't know yet how far this would go. I only knew one thing with certainty. They thought I wouldn't notice, and they were wrong. The attorney's office was quieter than I expected. No ringing phones, no rushed footsteps, just the soft hum of an air purifier and the faint smell of coffee that had been sitting too long on a warmer. The kind of place where people came after decisions had already been made. Her name was Judith Klein, mid-60s, estate litigation. 30 years of probate disputes and family implosions behind her eyes. She didn't interrupt while I explained. I laid everything out calmly. The lock, the LLC transfer, the email from my father, the attorney who refused to speak directly to me. I handed over a neatly organized folder of documents. She flipped through them without expression. When she finished, she leaned back and folded her hands. "They didn't notify you," she said. "No." "They didn't get your consent." "No." "And they acted knowing you were a named beneficiary." "Yes." She nodded once. "That matters." I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, validation. "This wasn't malicious," she continued. "It was strategic. They assumed you wouldn't challenge it." "That sounds like them," I said. Judith gave a thin smile. Families rarely see themselves as adversaries. They see themselves as entitled. "What are my options?" I asked. She didn't rush the answer. "We can file a notice of interest to freeze further transfers. We can request full disclosure. And if necessary, we can challenge the validity of the LLC transfer based on fiduciary breach." "If necessary," I repeated. She met my eyes. "Once we file, the tone changes. They'll know you're not staying quiet." I thought about my mother's message, about Claire's casual explanation on the porch. "I'm fine with that," I said. Judith nodded. "Good. Then we proceed carefully." I signed the engagement letter without hesitation. When I left her office, it was snowing lightly. Late winter flakes, drifting down like indecision. I sat in my car for a moment, hands on the wheel, breathing evenly. This wasn't revenge. This was containment. At work, I said nothing. I learned early in my career that information moves faster than intention. I didn't need sympathy or advice. I needed focus. Over the next week, Judith's office sent formal requests, copies of trust amendments, operating agreements for the LLC, meeting minutes, valuations. The response was slow, then defensive, then incomplete. Claire called me on a Thursday evening. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she said. No greeting. "I'm protecting my interests," I replied. "You're making Mom sick with stress." "I wasn't consulted," I said. "I'm correcting that." Her voice sharpened. "You always do this. You disappear, then come back acting like things happened without you." I closed my eyes. "They did happen without me," she scoffed. "You weren't around." "I was working," I said evenly. "That's not absence. That's adulthood." Silence stretched. "You don't need the money," she said finally. There it was. "That's not the point," I replied. "It kind of is," she said. "You have your career, your city, your life. This house means something to us." "Us," I repeated. "You know what I mean." "I do," I said. "That's why we're talking through attorneys now." She hung up. That night, I pulled my grandmother's will from the folder again. I read it slowly. She had been meticulous, specific, protective. She'd named me directly, included language about equal division regardless of proximity or involvement. She'd known exactly what kind of family she was leaving behind. I wondered when my parents decided her wishes were optional. The answer came sooner than expected. My father emailed Judith directly, copying me. "We are willing to discuss resolution, but believe this escalation is unnecessary," Judith replied within the hour. "Please provide the requested documents so we can assess accurately." 2 days later, the operating agreement arrived, and with it, the smoking gun. Claire had been added as managing member the same day the property transferred. My father as co-manager. No independent oversight, no notice to beneficiaries. They hadn't just rearranged assets. They'd consolidated control. Judith called me as soon as she reviewed it. "They crossed a line," she said. "How bad?" I asked. "Enough that a judge would listen." I exhaled slowly. "What's next?" "We file," she said. "Not aggressively. Precisely." The notice went out the following Monday. By Tuesday, my mother called. She sounded tired. "Hannah, why are you doing this to us?" I leaned against my kitchen counter. "I'm not doing anything to you. I'm responding." "We were going to tell you," she insisted. "When?" I asked. A pause. "We didn't want to worry you." I closed my eyes. "You didn't want me involved." "That's not fair." "It's accurate," I replied. She started crying then, softly, controlled. "You've always been so independent," she said. "We thought you wouldn't care." "That was a story you told yourselves," I said. "It made this easier." Silence. "Are you cutting me out?" I asked quietly. "No," she said quickly. Too quickly. "Then why does it look like that?" She didn't answer. When the call ended, I felt something unexpected. Not grief. Clarity. I finally understood that my family's version of love required me to stay peripheral. Useful when convenient, absent when complicated. And now that I was refusing that role, the system was pushing back. At the end of the week, Judith forwarded me a copy of a letter from my parents' attorney. They were proposing mediation. Not apology, not reversal, negotiation. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed back, "Will attend, with full disclosure." Judith added a final line before sending, "and no asset movement until then." I shut my laptop and sat in silence. The escalation had begun. Not with shouting, not with threats, with paperwork. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Because the more formal this became, the harder it would be for them to pretend this was about feelings. It wasn't. It was about control. And for the first time in my life, I was no longer willing to surrender it quietly. Mediation was scheduled for mid-April, 3 weeks away. Long enough for tension to ferment. Short enough that no one could pretend it wasn't happening. In the meantime, my parents did what they'd always done when confronted with discomfort. They closed ranks. The first sign came from an unexpected place. My Aunt Rachel, my mother's older sister, called one evening while I was cooking dinner. "I heard things are complicated," she said carefully. "That's one word for it," I replied. She sighed. "Your mother is beside herself. She says you're attacking the family." I stirred the pot slowly. I asked for documents. "That's not how she sees it." "I know." Rachel hesitated. "You have to understand. They're scared." "Of what?" I asked. "Of losing control," she said, then stopped herself. "I mean, of everything falling apart." I turned off the stove. "Rachel," I said evenly, "things don't fall apart because someone asks questions. They fall apart because they were unstable to begin with." She didn't argue. Instead, she said quietly, "Claire has been handling most of it." That confirmed what I already suspected. Claire wasn't just a beneficiary. She was a gatekeeper. At work, I threw myself into a new project, a longitudinal cancer trial with inconsistent data reporting across sites, the kind of problem that required patience and precision, the kind that rewarded distance from emotion. I noticed parallels everywhere. Incomplete records, assumptions baked into systems, people relying on silence as approval. The difference was that in my job, those patterns got corrected. At home, they got protected. Judith called me one morning before my shift. "They've retained a new accountant," she said. "Forensic." "That sounds serious," I replied. "It is," she said, "and defensive." "Good," I said. "Then they're taking this seriously." She paused. "You're calm." "I don't see the benefit in panic," I said. She chuckled softly. "You remind me of your grandmother." That stayed with me. The forensic report arrived the following week. It was thorough. and damning. The property transfer had been justified as a liability shield, the LLC framed as a protective measure. But the timing, the lack of notice, and the consolidation of authority painted a different picture. This wasn't protection. It was preemption. Judith walked me through it, line by line. They anticipated resistance, she said. They just didn't expect it from you. What happens now? I asked. Now, she said, we set terms. The proposed mediation agenda was clear. Freeze all assets. Revert management authority to neutral oversight. Reinstate original trust language pending review. No emotional concessions. No forced reconciliation. Just structure. Claire emailed me 2 days before mediation. This doesn't have to be so formal. I read it twice, then forwarded it to Judith without responding. On the morning of mediation, I wore a gray blazer and flat shoes. Nothing memorable. Nothing performative. The mediator was a retired judge named Thomas Riley. Late 60s. Even voice. No patience for theatrics. We sat across a polished table. My parents together. Claire beside them. Their attorney on one side. Judith and I on the other. Riley opened with the rules. Then he asked my parents to explain their position. My father spoke first, carefully. He framed everything as intention, protection, efficiency. Claire added details, logistics, handling things while I was busy. My mother said very little. When it was my turn, I didn't recount the lock or the hurt or the betrayal. I talked about documents, the will language, the lack of consent, the fiduciary obligation. Riley listened without interruption. Then he leaned back. You made changes affecting a named beneficiary without notification, he said to my parents. Why? My father hesitated. We didn't think it was necessary. Based on what? Riley asked. Silence. Claire jumped in. Hannah has always been independent. She lives far away. We didn't think she'd want to be involved in day-to-day decisions. Riley turned to me. Is that accurate? No, I said simply. He nodded. Then the assumption fails. Claire flushed. The mediator proposed a break. During the pause, my mother approached me near the coffee station. I never wanted it to be like this, she whispered. I know, I said. You could have just talked to us, she said. I asked for documents, I replied. That was talking. She looked away. When we reconvened, Riley made a recommendation. Immediate suspension of the LLC's managing authority. Appointment of a neutral trustee. Full accounting of all transactions since transfer. My parents' attorney objected. Mildly. Procedurally. Judith countered with precedent. The recommendation stood. Claire looked stunned. My father looked tired. My mother looked like she'd aged a year in an hour. The mediation ended without resolution. But the direction was set. As we gathered our things, Claire finally looked at me directly. You really don't trust us, she said. I trust processes, I replied. They're more consistent. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. Judith smiled faintly. You did well. I didn't do anything, I said. You held your ground, she corrected. On the drive home, my phone buzzed. A text from my father. We never meant to push you out. I pulled over before replying. Then I typed. Intent doesn't erase impact. He didn't respond. That night, alone in my apartment, I reviewed everything again. Not because I doubted myself, because this was the moment where people often back down, where pressure turns inward, where the cost of standing firm becomes personal. I felt it, the pull to make it easier, to smooth things over, to accept partial inclusion in exchange for peace. I closed the folder, and for the first time since this began, I allowed myself a single, clear thought. If I back down now, this would happen again. Maybe not with property, maybe with care decisions, or finances, or access, but it would happen. Because the system hadn't changed, only my response had, and I wasn't done yet. The real test was coming, not in court, but in what they would try next when procedure failed. The shift happened quietly, no raised voices, no angry messages, just a change in tone that I recognized immediately because I'd seen it in my work 100 times before. When people lose procedural ground, they pivot to narrative. The first sign came 3 days after mediation. My cousin Mark posted a photo on social media. A family dinner I hadn't been invited to. My parents at the center of the table, Claire beside them, one hand resting protectively on my mother's shoulder. The caption read, "Family is everything when times get hard." I didn't react, but I noticed who commented. Rachel, 2 aunts, a neighbor from my parents' street, sending love, praying for peace. Families shouldn't fight like this. No one tagged me. No one asked why I wasn't there. I understood the message clearly. I wasn't being challenged legally anymore. I was being reframed socially. That evening, my mother sent a long email. Not angry, not accusatory, wounded. She wrote about sleepless nights, about how she and my father had always tried to be fair, about how hard it was to feel attacked by her own child. She said she felt like she was losing me. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Judith. Her response came back a few minutes later. "Do not engage emotionally. This is not about reconciliation. This is about leverage." She was right. Still, the email stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because it changed my mind, because it revealed something important. My parents weren't trying to fix the problem. They were trying to restore the hierarchy. At work, I presented interim findings on the cancer trial to a review board. One site had manipulated enrollment criteria to improve outcomes. Not illegal, just misleading. The board asked if we should give them time to self-correct. "No," I said. "The longer a flawed system operates, the more invested people become in defending it." After the meeting, a colleague pulled me aside. "You're very calm about conflict," she said. "I've had practice," I replied. The following week, the neutral trustee reached out. Her name was Elaine Porter, former probate judge. No nonsense. She requested interviews with all parties. Mine was scheduled first. I didn't prepare emotionally. I prepared chronologically. Dates, decisions, documents. Elaine listened without interruption. When I finished, she asked one question. "What outcome would satisfy you?" I didn't hesitate. "Transparency," I said. "And no decisions made without my consent when they affect my interests." She nodded. "That's reasonable." Then she asked something unexpected. "Do you believe your parents intended to harm you?" I considered it. "No," I said. "I believe they intended to avoid discomfort and didn't consider the cost to me." Elaine's mouth tightened slightly. "That's often worse." When I left her office, I felt steadier than I had in weeks, because for the first time, someone in authority had named the issue accurately. Back home, Claire called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "You're poisoning people against us," she said immediately. "I haven't spoken to anyone," I replied. "Everyone thinks you're tearing the family apart." "Everyone you've spoken to," I said. She scoffed. "You're being cold." "I'm being precise," I replied. "You could stop this," she insisted. "Just tell your lawyer to back off." "And what happens then?" I asked. "We move on." I paused. "Without correcting anything?" "Yes," she said, "because this is bigger than you." There it was. "No," I said. "This is exactly about me." She laughed sharply. "You've always had a victim complex." I felt something click into place. "This conversation is over," I said. She hung up. 2 days later, Elaine issued her preliminary findings. The LLC transfer had violated fiduciary duty. The lack of beneficiary notice was improper. Management authority would remain suspended. She recommended reverting the property into the trust, pending court review. My parents' attorney requested an extension. Judith declined. That night, my father came to my apartment, unannounced. I opened the door and saw him standing there, hands in his coat pockets, shoulders slumped. "I just want to talk," he said. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat at my small kitchen table. "I don't understand why you're being so unforgiving," he said quietly. I folded my hands. "I'm not being unforgiving. I'm being consistent." "We raised you better than this," he said. I looked at him steadily. "You raised me to pay attention." He flinched. "We didn't think you'd fight us," he admitted. "I'm not fighting you," I said. "I'm defending myself." He rubbed his face. "Claire is devastated." "I didn't choose her role," I said. "She did." Silence filled the room. Finally, he said, "What do you want from us?" I answered honestly. "I want you to stop deciding things for me, and I want you to accept that I don't owe silence in exchange for belonging." He nodded slowly. "I don't know if your mother can do that," he said. "I know," I replied. He stood to leave. At the door, he turned back. "If this goes to court, things will change." "Yes," I said. "They already have." After he left, I sat alone for a long time. The narrative campaign continued quietly over the next week. Concerned messages, vague posts, invitations that excluded me. I didn't respond to any of it because the real movement was happening elsewhere. In filings, in rulings, in systems adjusting to reality. One evening, Judith called with an update. "They're offering to reinstate you as a beneficiary," she said. I laughed softly. "I already am." "Yes," she said, "but now they want you to acknowledge Claire as primary manager." I didn't hesitate. "No." Judith smiled through the phone. "I thought you'd say that." "They still don't get it," I said. "No," she agreed. "But they're running out of options." That was the truth. The more they tried to restore control without accountability, the more obvious it became what this had always been about. Not love, not protection, authority, and I was no longer willing to pretend otherwise. As I shut down my laptop that night, a strange calm settled over me, the kind that comes when you stop negotiating your own value. The next phase wouldn't be subtle. They were going to escalate again, and this time, it wouldn't be through paperwork. It would be through pressure. And I was ready for it. The pressure arrived, disguised as concern. It always does. It started with small things. Invitations that included everyone but me. Group texts where my name was conspicuously absent. Updates about family decisions delivered after the fact, framed as if they were neutral information rather than deliberate exclusion. I didn't respond. Silence, I'd learned, wasn't weakness. It was a boundary without an argument attached. The first real escalation came from my mother. She showed up at my workplace. Not inside the hospital. She knew better than that. She waited across the street at a cafe, then texted me as my shift ended. "I'm here. I just want 5 minutes." I stood in the lobby for a long moment, badge still clipped to my jacket, weighing the cost of engagement. Then I crossed the street. She looked older than she had a month earlier. Not frail, just worn down by resistance she wasn't used to meeting. "I didn't know where else to go," she said as I sat down. "You know my phone number," I replied. She winced. "You don't answer." "I do," I said calmly, "when the message is about logistics." Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around her mug. "Your father is barely sleeping," she said. "Claire is under so much stress. The children are asking questions." I waited. "You've made your point," she continued. "Why keep going?" I leaned back in my chair. "Because the behavior hasn't changed." Her eyes filled. "We offered to fix things. You offered to restore what was already mine," I said. "With new conditions." "That's compromise. That's leverage," I corrected. She shook her head. "You've become so rigid." "No," I said. "I've become clear." That word landed harder than I expected. I saw it in her face. The realization that I wasn't confused, angry, or lashing out. I was decided. "Hannah," she whispered, "do you really want to tear this family apart?" I met her gaze. I didn't tear it apart. I stopped holding it together by myself. She cried then, openly, quietly. People glanced over. I didn't move to comfort her. Not because I didn't care, because I finally understood that soothing her distress had always come at the expense of my own. After a few minutes, she composed herself. "What happens if you win?" she asked. I thought about it. "Then things are corrected. Legally, structurally. And emotionally?" she pressed. "That part is up to you," I said. She nodded slowly. "I don't recognize you anymore." I stood. "You never really did." I left before she could respond. 2 days later, Elaine Porter released her formal recommendation. The property was to be returned to the trust immediately, all management authority suspended. Future decisions required unanimous beneficiary consent. Claire's name appeared nowhere in the management section. That omission was not accidental. My parents' attorney requested emergency review. Judith was unimpressed. "They're panicking," she told me. "This removes their ability to control timing." "What happens next?" I asked. "If they reject the recommendation, we file," she said. "If they accept it, they lose leverage." "And either way," I prompted, "they lose momentum." The family responded by changing tactics. They stopped framing me as difficult. They reframed me as unstable. A mutual acquaintance messaged me late one night. "Hey, are you okay? Your mom said you've been under a lot of stress." I didn't reply. Another message followed the next day, from someone else. "We're worried about you." Maybe take a break from all this legal stuff. That was when I understood the next move. If they couldn't control the assets, they would try to undermine my credibility. Not overtly, subtly. Concern instead of accusation. Doubt instead of blame. At work, I was meticulous, careful, documenting everything. Not because I was slipping, but because I knew how narratives worked. One loose thread was all it took. Claire tried again that weekend. She came to my apartment building and waited in the lobby. "I just want to talk like sisters," she said when I appeared. I looked at her. Really looked. She was exhausted, angry, afraid. "Say what you need to say," I replied. "You've always been jealous," she said bluntly. "Of my life, of the kids, of how close Mom and Dad are to us." I didn't react. "And now you've found a way to punish us," she continued. "You're enjoying this." "No," I said. "I'm ending it." She scoffed. "You're ruining everything over a house." "This isn't about the house," I said quietly. "It's about how easily you all decided I didn't need a voice." She shook her head. "You weren't there." "I was alive," I replied. "That should have been enough." Her jaw tightened. "What do you want, Hannah? An apology? A plaque?" "I want the system that allowed this to stop," I said. "That's it." She stared at me, then laughed bitterly. "You think you're better than us now." I stepped back. "I think I'm done being smaller than you." That did it. Her face hardened. "If you take this to court, don't expect to be welcome again." I nodded. "That's already the case." She turned and walked out. That night, Judith called with urgency in her voice. "They filed a petition claiming undue influence," she said. My stomach tightened. "Against whom?" "Your grandmother," she said. Posthumously. I closed my eyes. "They're arguing the will was the product of manipulation," she continued. "Specifically, by you." The audacity was almost impressive. "They're suggesting you pressured her before her death," Judith added. "It's weak, but it's hostile." "So they're willing to erase her agency too," I said. "Yes," she replied. "And now this becomes adversarial." I took a slow breath. "What do? "We counter," she said, "with evidence. And we move fast." After we hung up, I sat in the dark, laptop closed, hands folded. They had crossed a line. Not legally. Strategically. They weren't just trying to win. They were trying to discredit me by rewriting the past. My grandmother, who had been sharper at 80 than most people at 40, who had drafted that will with intention and clarity. They were willing to paint her as confused, to maintain control. That was when something settled fully into place. This was no longer about inheritance. This was about erasure. And I knew exactly how to respond to that. Not with outrage, with proof. I opened the folder labeled More and added a new subfolder, Grandmother. By morning, I would have affidavits, medical records, witness statements. They thought they could muddy the waters. But I made my living in clean data. And once the truth was laid out plainly, there would be no way to spin it. The next chapter wouldn't be quiet. It would be decisive. By the time the sun came up, I had already sent 6 emails, 2 to Judith, 1 to my grandmother's former physician, 1 to the attorney who had drafted the original will, 2 to people who had witnessed my grandmother's final year more closely than my parents ever admitted. I wasn't angry. I was efficient. That's the mistake people make when they assume restraint means weakness. They forget that restraint conserves energy, and I had a lot of energy available. Judith called me at 8:07 a.m. "I was just about to reach out," she said. "You're already ahead of me." "I know," I replied. "I've started assembling counter-evidence." She exhaled softly. "Good, because their petition is sloppy, emotion-driven. But judges don't reward theatrics. They reward documentation." "They're questioning my grandmother's capacity," I said. "Yes," Judith replied. "Which means we defend her competence, not your character." "That works for me." By noon, the first response arrived. Dr. Samuel Green, my grandmother's primary care physician for over a decade, emailed personally. "Hannah, your grandmother was cognitively sharp until the end. No diagnosis of impairment. I can provide sworn testimony if needed." I forwarded it to Judith without comment. The next response hit harder. Margaret Lyle, the attorney who drafted the will, agreed to submit an affidavit. "Your grandmother initiated the changes. She asked specifically about protecting all grandchildren equally. She expressed concern about future pressure from family members." I read that line twice. Future pressure. She had known. By mid-afternoon, My parents' attorney filed a motion requesting expedited review. Judith countered with our evidence. The court scheduled a preliminary hearing 3 weeks out. At work, I stayed late to finish a report, not because it was urgent, but because the rhythm of analysis steadied me. That evening, Claire texted, "I can't believe you'd let this go so far." I didn't reply. 10 minutes later, another message appeared. "Mom's heart condition is acting up. Are you happy now?" I stared at the screen. Then I took a screenshot and forwarded it to Judith. Her response came quickly. "Do not engage. This is coercion." She was right. Still, it hurt. Not because I believed I was responsible, but because they were willing to use fear as currency. The hearing arrived sooner than I expected. The courtroom was small, neutral, designed for process, not spectacle. My parents sat together, Claire beside them. Their attorney leaned in, whispering reassurance. Judith and I sat across the aisle. When the judge entered, the room stilled. The argument from my parents' side focused on narrative. They spoke of influence, of vulnerability, of a devoted granddaughter exerting pressure under the guise of care. Judith didn't raise her voice when it was our turn. She spoke of facts, medical evaluations, attorney affidavits, witness testimony. She introduced documentation showing my grandmother had raised concerns about family dynamics explicitly. When she finished, the judge looked directly at my parents' attorney. "Do you have evidence contradicting the decedent's competence?" he asked. The attorney hesitated. "Not beyond family observations." The judge nodded once. "Which are insufficient." He turned the page. "The petition alleging undue influence is denied," he said. "Further attempts to challenge the will on these grounds will be viewed unfavorably." A pause. "Additionally," he continued, "the court affirms the trustee's recommendation. The property will revert to the trust immediately." Claire's face went pale. My mother reached for my father's hand. I felt nothing dramatic, just resolution. Outside the courthouse, my father approached me. His voice was low. "You didn't have to humiliate us." I met his eyes. "You tried to erase her judgment." He looked away. Claire didn't speak to me at all. Judith squeezed my arm lightly. "You handled that exactly right." On the drive home, my phone buzzed repeatedly. Text from extended family. Confused, awkward, some apologetic, some distant. The narrative had shifted again. Not because I argued, because the truth was documented. That night, my mother called. Her voice was quiet, exhausted. "I didn't know they would do that," she said. I didn't ask who she meant. "I never thought we'd question your grandmother," she continued. "That wasn't what I wanted." "I believe you," I said. She inhaled sharply. "Then why does it feel like we lost you?" I closed my eyes. "You didn't lose me," I said. "You lost control." Silence. "That's not the same thing." She didn't respond. Over the next week, things changed quickly. The trustee finalized the reversion. Management authority was reassigned. All beneficiaries were formally notified. My name appeared on every document. Claire's didn't. That omission echoed louder than any argument ever could. At work, I was offered a leadership role on the trial project. My supervisor said, "You have a way of seeing systems clearly under pressure." I accepted, because for once, accepting didn't come with guilt. On Friday evening, I sat alone in my apartment with a glass of water, watching the city lights flicker on. The fight wasn't over, but something fundamental had shifted. They could no longer question my grandmother's clarity without consequence. They could no longer move assets quietly, and they could no longer pretend this was about misunderstanding. They had played their strongest card and lost. The next move wouldn't be legal. It would be personal. And that was where things would get truly uncomfortable for them. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. The silence afterward was louder than the courtroom ever had been. For weeks, no one called. No one texted. The group chats went dormant. Invitations stopped entirely, as if removing me from the family required less effort now that it had been normalized. I didn't chase it. I let the quiet do its work. At first, the absence felt strange, like phantom pain. I'd grown so used to bracing myself for updates, accusations, emotional weather reports disguised as conversation. Without them, my nervous system didn't quite know what to do. Then something unexpected happened. It rested. The first personal escalation came through my grandmother's things. Claire emailed, CCing my parents and Judith. Since you've made it clear you want to be involved now, we need to discuss Grandma's personal effects. Jewelry, letters, keepsakes. Mom thinks it's only fair that I handle distribution. I read the message once. Then again, only fair. I forwarded it to Judith. Her reply was blunt. She has no authority. All distribution goes through the trustee. Good, I thought. Then I typed a response of my own. All personal effects should be inventoried by the trustee. Please coordinate through Elaine. No emotion, no commentary. The reply came back fast. You're turning everything into a legal procedure. Yes, I typed, because that's what happens when trust is broken. She didn't respond. A week later, Elaine contacted me directly. I wanted you to hear this from me, she said. Your sister attempted to access the storage unit holding your grandmother's belongings. I closed my eyes. Without authorization? Yes. What did you do? I denied the request and documented it, she said. I also informed opposing counsel. Thank you, I said. After the call ended, I sat very still. Claire hadn't learned anything. She was still trying to act first and justify later. That impulse had always been rewarded in our family. Until now. At work, my promotion became official. Team lead. More responsibility. Less noise. I noticed something interesting in myself. I wasn't flinching anymore. Not when my phone buzzed. Not when I received an unfamiliar email. Not when I passed people who knew my family and avoided my eyes. The fear of being misunderstood had loosened its grip, because I was no longer trying to be understood by people invested in misreading me. The next personal move came from my father. He asked to meet. Just the two of us. I agreed. We chose a diner halfway between our homes. Neutral ground again. He looked older, thinner, less certain. I don't recognize this version of you, he said after we ordered. I sipped my water. You're seeing me without compliance, he frowned. You make it sound like we controlled you. You did, I said calmly. You just called it guidance. He shook his head. We were trying to keep the family stable. By excluding me, I replied. He looked down at his hand. Claire is struggling, he said quietly. She feels replaced. I almost laughed. Replaced by what? I asked. Process? He didn't answer. I didn't take anything from her, I continued. I took myself out of a system that required me to lose in order for her to feel secure. That's not how she sees it. I know, I said. That's why this keeps happening. He leaned back. What do you want now, Hannah? I answered without hesitation. Distance, I said, and honesty. If you can't do both, then just distance. He stared at me for a long moment. Your mother won't accept that, he said. That's her work, I replied, not mine. When we stood to leave, he hesitated. If you ever change your mind. I won't, I said gently. But thank you for asking. That was the last conversation we had that year. The final escalation came quietly. Almost invisibly, the trustee sent an update. All beneficiary distributions had been recalculated. Claire's previous informal access was revoked. Future requests required unanimous consent. Nothing dramatic, just final. A week later, a mutual friend told me Claire had been telling people I was cold, calculating, that I'd always been like this. I smiled when I heard that, because she was finally telling the truth. I had always been observant, methodical, calm under pressure. I'd just stopped using those traits to protect everyone else at my own expense. The revenge, if anyone insisted on calling it that, wasn't that Claire lost control. It was that the system no longer bent to accommodate her. It treated us equally. Inequality felt like punishment to someone used to privilege. One evening, alone in my apartment, I opened my laptop and reviewed the trust documents one last time. Everything was in place. No loopholes. No ambiguity. I closed the file and didn't reopen it because I didn't need to. The power shift was complete. They could no longer move around me. They could no longer rewrite the past. And most importantly, they could no longer access me emotionally to compensate for what they'd lost structurally. The next chapter of my life wouldn't involve them at all. And that, more than any courtroom victory, felt like freedom. The absence didn't create peace right away. First, it created space. And space has a way of revealing things you've been too busy to notice. Without the constant low-level tension of family contact, my days stretched differently. Mornings were quieter. Evenings didn't end with a mental replay of conversations, wondering what I should have said, or softened, or ignored. I started sleeping through the night. That alone felt like a confession. In early June, Elaine requested a final round of confirmations. Nothing dramatic, just procedural closure. I signed electronically from my kitchen table, sunlight pooling on the floor, coffee cooling beside my laptop. One click. That was it. The trust was stabilized. Oversight formalized. Access equalized. No more emergency clauses. No more ambiguity disguised as flexibility. Afterward, Elaine called. "You handled this unusually well," she said. I smiled faintly. "I'm good at systems." "You're better at boundaries," she corrected. At work, the new role brought visibility I hadn't anticipated. Not attention, accountability. I was invited into rooms where decisions were made early, where assumptions were challenged before they calcified. During one meeting, a senior researcher dismissed a concern raised by a junior analyst. "It's probably nothing," he said. I looked at the data. Probably isn't a category we can afford. The room went quiet. Later, the analyst stopped by my office. "Thank you," she said. I almost didn't speak up. I recognized the look in her eyes. Relief mixed with disbelief. The feeling of being heard without being exposed. I realized then that this wasn't just recovery. It was recalibration. My mother sent a letter that month. Not an email. Handwritten. She wrote about the garden, about a neighbor's illness, about how quiet the house felt now. She didn't mention the trust, or Claire, or the case. At the end, she wrote, "I'm trying to understand how things changed so quickly." I read it once, then again. Then I folded it and placed it in a drawer. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, because I wasn't responsible for narrating the change she'd helped create. The first time I ran into Claire unexpectedly was at a grocery store near my apartment. I saw her before she saw me. She looked thinner, tired, less certain in her movements. When our eyes met, she froze. Then she smiled. Tight, polite. "Hannah," she said, "I didn't know you lived around here." "I moved last year," I replied. "Oh," she said. "Of course." An awkward pause. "So," she said finally, "everything's settled now." "Yes," I said. She waited. For reassurance. For guilt. For something. When it didn't come, her smile faded. "I hope you're happy," she said. I held her gaze. "I'm stable." She flinched. "You always talk like it's business." "It is," I said. "It always was." She looked away first. That encounter stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because it hurt, because it clarified something important. Claire wasn't angry because she'd lost something. She was angry because she'd lost her position relative to me. At home that night, I cooked dinner slowly, intentionally. I thought about how often I'd rushed meals before. How many evenings had been shaped around someone else's emotional schedule. I ate without distraction. I didn't check my phone. For the first time in years, my life felt proportional. In July, my parents listed the lake house, the one I hadn't been allowed into without a key. I saw the listing online by accident. Staged photos, neutral descriptions, no mention of family history. I felt a brief ache, then nothing. Ownership had never guaranteed belonging. That lesson had already been paid for. A week later, my father emailed. Just information, not a request. The house sold. Closing next month. I replied with 2 words. "Thank you." No follow-up came. That was the new pattern. Information without expectation. Distance without drama. It wasn't reconciliation. It was resolution. That summer, I took my first vacation in years. Not to visit family, not for an obligation. I rented a small cabin near Lake Superior. No cell service. No schedule. On the second night, sitting on the porch as the sun dropped behind the trees, something inside me shifted. Not loudly, just enough. I realized I no longer felt the need to justify my choices to people who benefited from my compliance. I didn't need their approval, and more importantly, I didn't need their understanding. The betrayal had forced me to see the truth, but the aftermath had taught me something even more valuable. I could choose myself without becoming cruel. I could enforce boundaries without explaining them, and I could walk away without collapsing. The final chapter wasn't going to be about revenge. It was going to be about authorship, about deciding what came next without asking who might object. And for the first time, That question felt wide open. I didn't announce the changes I made next. That was intentional. For most of my life, I'd been conditioned to explain myself in advance, to soften decisions before anyone else could be inconvenienced by them. This time, I let the decisions exist first. Then I watched what followed. In August, I updated my emergency contacts, removed my parents, removed Claire. I replaced them with 2 people who had shown up consistently, without conditions. A colleague who knew my work inside out. A friend who had sat on my floor during the worst weeks and never once asked what I planned to do next. When the confirmation email arrived, I felt a flicker of something unexpected. Relief. The quiet kind that settles after you lock a door you should have locked years ago. At work, the new authority changed how people spoke around me. Not deferential, more careful. During a budget review, a department head tried to rush a decision through. "We'll clean it up later," he said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply said, "We don't move forward without full review." He frowned. "This delays the timeline." "Yes," I said. "That's the cost of accuracy." No one contradicted me. Later, my supervisor pulled me aside. "You don't bend," she observed. "I evaluate," I replied. She smiled. "That's why this works." The first real test of my new distance came unexpectedly. My mother was admitted to the hospital for observation. Nothing critical, according to the message that came through an aunt. Just a scare. The aunt's message was careful. "She doesn't want to worry you, but she keeps asking if you've been told." I sat with that for a long moment. Then I replied, "Please let me know if there's a decision I need to be involved in. No rush, no guilt. No urgency manufactured by expectation." The update that followed was brief. "She's stable. Being discharged tomorrow." That was enough. I didn't go. And that choice, more than any legal filing, confirmed something important. I could care without surrendering my autonomy. The old version of me would have dropped everything, driven 4 hours, absorbed whatever tension waited at the bedside, and left depleted. This time, I stayed where I was. And the world didn't end. In September, Elaine closed the final administrative loop. The trust was fully operational under neutral oversight. Annual reviews scheduled, no exceptions. She called me personally. "You won't need me anymore," she said. "Hopefully not," I replied. She paused. "You handled this with restraint. That's rare." "It wasn't restraint," I said. "It was intention." That fall, my work took me to a conference in Seattle. 3 days of panels, late dinners, and conversations that stayed technical instead of personal. One evening, a woman in her late 50s approached me after a session. "You speak like someone who's been underestimated," she said. I smiled. "Frequently," she nodded. "It sharpens you." Back in Minneapolis, I received a short message from Claire. "Just wanted to say the kids ask about you." I read it once. Then I placed the phone face down on the table. I didn't respond, not out of spite, because access to me was no longer negotiated through guilt. The pattern was clear now. When I stayed silent, they adjusted. When I held my boundary, they recalibrated. No one liked it, but everyone respected it. That winter, Thanksgiving passed quietly. A message exchanged. No invitations. No expectations. I spent the day with friends. We cooked too much food. We laughed. No one needed me to be smaller. At the end of the night, as I washed dishes in someone else's kitchen, I felt something settle fully into place. The injustice hadn't been repaired by apology. It had been neutralized by structure, by choosing law over argument, by choosing clarity over comfort, by choosing myself without theatrics. The revenge, if it deserved that word, wasn't about watching anyone suffer. It was about watching the system stop working against me and knowing it wouldn't be able to do so again. As winter deepened, I realized the final phase wasn't about what my family did next. It was about what I would allow next. And that decision was already made. The story wasn't ending, but the conflict was, and that was enough. The invitation arrived without drama. No apology attached, no explanation. Just an email from my mother, brief and carefully worded. "We're planning a small Christmas dinner. If you'd like to come, you're welcome." No time listed. No expectation stated. No pressure disguised as sentiment. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. This was new. Not reconciliation. Not control. An offer without leverage. I didn't respond right away. That was another habit I'd let go of. Immediate replies had always been a form of reassurance, proof that I was still reachable, still available for emotional management. Instead, I waited 2 days. Then I replied with one sentence. Thank you for the invitation. I won't be able to attend, but I hope the evening is peaceful. I hit send and closed my laptop. There was no follow-up, no guilt-laced message, no call, no attempt to renegotiate. That silence told me everything. At work, December brought its own form of reckoning. An internal review flagged irregularities in a long-running study overseen by a senior researcher with an impeccable reputation. The data wasn't fabricated. It was selectively reported. Outcomes emphasized. Failures minimized. The review committee hesitated. He's been here 20 years, someone said. This could get messy. I listened, then spoke. If we avoid correction because someone is established, we're admitting the system protects status over truth. The room went quiet. I wasn't trying to make a point. I was stating a condition. The recommendation passed. When the researcher confronted me afterward, his voice was tight. You're very confident for someone relatively new in leadership, he said. I'm confident in the process, I replied. It applies to everyone. He studied me for a moment, then nodded once. I suppose it does, he said. That exchange stayed with me because it mirrored something I'd learned the hard way. People rarely object to fairness until it costs them something. Mid-December, my Aunt Rachel called. I just wanted you to know, she said. Your parents are adjusting. I almost laughed. To what? I asked. To not being the center of everything, she admitted. It's been hard for them. I understand, I said. She hesitated. Do you miss them? I considered the question honestly. I miss the idea of them, I said. Not the dynamic. That makes sense, she said quietly. Christmas came quietly. I spent the morning alone, coffee in hand, watching snow gather along the windowsill. No rush, no itinerary, no emotional calculus. Later, friends stopped by. We exchanged small, thoughtful gifts. Nothing symbolic, nothing performative. That evening, I checked my phone once. A message from my father. Merry Christmas. Hope you're well, I replied. Merry Christmas. I am. And I was. In January, Elaine forwarded the final annual report. Everything balanced. No disputes, no exceptions. She included a short note. You've created a structure that doesn't rely on trust alone. That's wise. I saved the message. Not because I needed validation, because it marked the end of something. The conflict had burned itself out. Not in a blaze, in a quiet, irreversible shift. The last attempt to pull me back came from an unexpected angle. Claire's husband, Andrew, emailed, Hannah, I know things have been difficult. Claire's been struggling. I thought maybe a conversation could help. I read it carefully. Then I replied, I'm not available for conversations that frame accountability as conflict. I wish you all well. He didn't respond. That was the final boundary. At work, I was asked to mentor a new hire. A woman in her early 30s. Brilliant. Hesitant. During our first meeting, she said, I don't want to seem difficult. I looked at her. Difficult to whom? I asked. She blinked. That's the wrong question, I continued. The right one is whether you're correct. She smiled, relief flickering across her face. I realized then that the story I'd lived through wasn't just mine. It was a pattern. Women trained to equate silence with harmony, compliance with love, self-erasure with maturity. I hadn't broken free by becoming louder. I'd done it by becoming precise. As winter gave way to early spring, I noticed something else. I wasn't replaying the past anymore. The lock on the door, the emails, the courtroom. They'd lost their emotional charge. They were just data points now, evidence of a system I no longer lived inside. The final realization came one evening as I walked home from work, the air sharp but clean. I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned with my values, aligned with my choices, aligned with myself. That alignment was the real outcome. Not inheritance, not vindication, not revenge in the traditional sense. The power hadn't shifted back and forth. It had settled. And once power settles, it doesn't need to announce itself. It simply exists. The final chapter wouldn't be about my family at all. It would be about What comes after you stop explaining yourself. About the life you build when you're no longer negotiating your worth. And about the quiet confidence that follows when you choose yourself without apology. The first sign that something fundamental had changed wasn't emotional. It was physical. I stopped clenching my jaw. I noticed it one morning while brushing my teeth, staring at my reflection under the soft bathroom light. My shoulders were relaxed, my breath steady. My body, for the first time in years, wasn't bracing for impact that never came. That was when I understood how long I'd been living in a state of quiet vigilance, always anticipating the next request, the next expectation, the next decision made without me. Letting go of that didn't feel dramatic. It felt unfamiliar. At work, the mentoring relationship deepened. The new hire, Melissa, started bringing me drafts before meetings, not for approval, for clarity. "You're good at cutting through noise," she said one afternoon. "You don't over-explain." I smiled faintly. I used to. It didn't help. She hesitated. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Once," I said. "How did you learn to stop caring what people think?" I considered that. "I didn't stop caring," I said. "I stopped prioritizing." She nodded slowly, like she was filing the answer away for later. In February, my mother sent another letter. This one was shorter. "I'm trying to respect your space. I just wanted you to know I'm thinking about you. No guilt, no request." I read it, folded it, and placed it next to the other one. That was enough. I didn't need more proof that she was changing, or trying to. Change didn't have to be dramatic to be real. The next family update came through Rachel again. Claire had been struggling financially. Not dramatically, not disastrously, just adjusting. Her access to family resources had been curtailed. The informal support she'd relied on no longer flowed freely. She was learning what it felt like to plan without a safety net, quietly arranged by other people. Rachel didn't say it directly, but the implication was clear. This was new territory for her. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt recognition. The system hadn't been designed to harm me alone. It had been designed to protect her. When that protection was removed, reality arrived. At the hospital, a difficult case escalated quickly. A sponsor questioned our methodology after unfavorable results emerged. Pressure mounted to reinterpret the data. The room grew tense. I listened, then spoke. "We don't change conclusions to accommodate comfort," I said. "We document, we disclose, and we move forward." Someone sighed. Someone else nodded. The decision held. Later, my supervisor stopped by. "You're steady under pressure," she said. "Where did you learn that?" I didn't answer right away. "By being ignored," I said finally. "You learn to listen carefully when no one is listening to you." She studied me for a moment. "That's not something most people survive intact." "I didn't survive it," I said. "I outgrew it." Spring arrived slowly. The city thawed. Sidewalks cleared. Light lingered longer in the evenings. With it came an unexpected invitation. Not from my parents, from Elaine. She was retiring and hosting a small farewell gathering. Former colleagues, a few former clients. "I'd like you to come," she said on the phone. "Not professionally, personally." I agreed. The event was understated. Wine, conversation, no speeches. At one point, Elaine introduced me to a woman in her 70s. "This is Hannah," Elaine said. "She reminds me of myself at 30. The woman took my hand and smiled. "Then you've been through something," she said. I smiled back. "Yes." She squeezed my hand once. "Good. It sharpens your sense of fairness." That night, walking home, I thought about how many women had quietly fought similar battles. Not loudly, not publicly, but effectively. The stories didn't always make headlines, but they changed systems. In April, my father called, not to ask anything, just to inform. "Your mother and I are updating our healthcare directives. We wanted you to know." I appreciated the neutrality. "Thank you," I said. "I hope it goes smoothly." There was a pause. "I know we didn't handle things well," he said carefully. I waited. "I don't expect forgiveness," he continued. "I just wanted to acknowledge it." I closed my eyes briefly. "Noted," I said. "That matters." It was the most honest exchange we'd had in years, and it was enough. The following week, I made a decision that would have terrified the old version of me. I declined a project, not because I couldn't do it, Because it would have required travel that disrupted the balance I'd built. My supervisor raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She nodded. "Good. That means you know your limits." Limits, not weaknesses, not failures, just edges that defined where I ended and other people began. One evening, as I organized old files, I came across a photo of my grandmother. She was sitting in her garden, sunlight on her face, expression calm and knowing. I realized something then. She hadn't left me an inheritance. She'd left me a blueprint, not for money, for boundaries, for foresight, for the courage to be precise when others preferred ambiguity. The story was nearly complete. Not because everyone was healed, but because I was no longer entangled in what they refused to heal. The final chapter wouldn't close with reconciliation. It would close with authorship, with the understanding that I didn't need to be included to belong to myself. And that realization had changed everything. The last decision I made that year was deceptively small. I changed my mailing address. Not because I moved, because I wanted everything addressed to me, directly, without passing through anyone else's hands. When the confirmation came through, I felt a quiet finality settle in my chest. It wasn't about logistics. It was about authorship. For most of my life, my role in the family had been passive, but essential. I absorbed tension. I smoothed transitions. I made myself useful, so no one had to confront discomfort directly. That role ended the moment I stopped responding on cue. And what followed wasn't chaos. It was adjustment. In May, I hosted a small dinner at my apartment. Not a celebration, just a table, 6 chairs, and people from different parts of my life who didn't require me to be one version of myself to coexist with another. A colleague from work, a neighbor, 2 friends who'd known me before everything broke open. No one asked about my family. No one needed context. At one point, someone raised a glass and said, "You seem settled." The word stayed with me. Settled didn't mean finished, or healed, or untouched by what had happened. It meant rooted. Later that night, after everyone left, I stood in the quiet kitchen and thought about how far I'd come from the woman standing on that porch months earlier, key in hand, realizing access had been revoked without warning. That woman had been confused. Not because she didn't understand what was happening, because she hadn't yet accepted what it meant. She still believed love prevented exclusion. She still believed loyalty would eventually be rewarded. She still believed that if she stayed reasonable long enough, someone else would be fair. I didn't blame her for that, but I didn't live by it anymore. The summer brought one final development. The trust administrator sent a routine update. Nothing alarming, just confirmation that everything remained in order. At the bottom of the email was a line I hadn't expected. "Please confirm your preferred point of contact for any future decisions." I typed back immediately. Me. One word. I didn't hear much from my parents after that. Occasional updates. Neutral. Respectful. They had learned the cost of assuming my silence meant consent. Claire faded from my daily thoughts almost entirely. Not because I forgave her, because she no longer had proximity. Distance did what confrontation never could. It removed her from my internal landscape. At work, the mentoring program expanded. Melissa flourished. She presented confidently, asked better questions, took up space without apology. One afternoon, she said, "I used to think strength meant being agreeable." I smiled. "That's what people tell you when they benefit from your agreement." She laughed softly. I'm glad someone told me the truth. I thought about my grandmother again, about how she'd seen all of this long before I did. She hadn't tried to change my parents, or Claire, or the family dynamic. She'd simply designed a structure that didn't require trust to function. That was her gift. And now it was mine to honor. The final realization came unexpectedly, on an ordinary evening. I was walking home, the city warm and familiar around me, when my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "This is Andrew, Claire's husband. I just wanted to say, I see now that you were right." I stopped walking. I read it once. Then again. I didn't respond. Not because it wasn't sincere, but because acknowledgement after the fact doesn't require engagement. Some truths arrive too late to change the outcome. And that's okay. What mattered wasn't who finally understood me. It was that I understood myself. I understood that love without agency is control. That peace purchased with silence is not peace. That belonging which requires erasure is not belonging at all. I didn't win because my family lost. I won because I stopped playing a game designed to diminish me. The revenge, if it deserves that word, was quiet and structural. It was choosing law over pleading, process over emotion, boundaries over performance. It was refusing to be available for manipulation. It was deciding that my life would no longer be shaped by people who confused access with entitlement. And the greatest outcome wasn't money or property or vindication. It was freedom from explanation. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in any part of it, if you've ever been excluded, managed, or quietly erased by people who claimed to love you, remember this: you are allowed to choose clarity over comfort. You are allowed to protect yourself without being cruel. You are allowed to step out of roles that require you to shrink. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't confrontation. It's authorship. It's deciding who has access, on what terms, and at what cost. And once you make that decision, everything else adjusts around it. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like the video, leave a comment, or share your own experience. And if you want more stories about family drama, betrayal, karma, and quiet revenge that actually works, make sure to subscribe. Some stories don't just entertain. They remind you that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary.